Welcome to a Dram of Outlander. This is Desiree, your podcaster and the writer for dramofoutlander.com. For all things Outlander, from the Dinah Gabaldon book series to the Stars TV series and everything in between. This is episode 107. A. Malcolm, also known as Print Shop, S3, E6. Hello! What an episode, right? Well, I had thought the episode would be very short time period of about 24 hours, and it was, which I like being correct. Anyhow, the episode was written for television by Matthew B. Roberts and directed by Norma Bailey, and as always, the music is done by Bear McCreary. Well, we know this is 1766 Edinburgh, and Claire is 50, and Jamie's about 45 and a half. So they're middle-aged at this point. And we've already gone to see Claire's insecurities and what that meant to her. And this episode opens from that same morning that Claire arrived, from Jamie's vantage point. And there's so much expectation and anticipation for this episode. Book readers have been waiting 20 years for this or more, and viewers are falling in love with these characters, and they're anticipating it in real time, essentially. And it really takes for a book reader has to view this at least twice in order to shake off the expectations and to see it with fresh eyes. I think when we have years invested into a story and into characters, especially where there's really key elements of the story being told, it's really difficult to watch it and have it sort of filter free and to see it as its own thing. So I've watched it 3 times now, and I had a technical difficulty, so the first podcast I had to pitch out, and I'm re-recording it for you. So I know I work very hard not to discuss the books in the context of talking about the episode, but I had to put that caveat in because as we get deeper into some of this integral material, somebody who's read the books is going to really have to work hard to see the show as its own thing and separate from the books. And as I've said before, I think this season overall, the adaptation process has been the best of all the seasons. And I think everyone's hitting their stride. Got past the freshman and sophomore seasons, and now we're in this for the long haul, hopefully, right? So, as I've told you before, my husband has not read any of the books, which I still think is hilarious since I brought them with me to the marriage. And no dice for him. Not yet. But what's fascinating is I have to sit and view the episode for the first time and say nothing. I just have to watch it. And I do make noise. I might squeal or clap or get up and run around the family room. But I don't want to spoil it for him because he tells me that he really has questions and he tries to guess which of the lines are from the book and which aren't. And he really wants to see it unfold because he believes that the questions he has in mind will be resolved. So I have to be really careful not to just spew things out because I can or give him too much information. Because even though as a longtime reader of the Outlander books, like many of you, I have a framework of knowledge But we really don't know what the writer's room is going to do. We don't. And I think some of the writers really like this material, but some of the writers in the writer's room may never have read the books. And that has been a mix before, and I'm not quite sure how that works in the process, but I think it might explain how some stuff seems really kind of out of left field. But I honestly don't know what's going to happen. Neither does any other reader. We presume the really big events will be there, but we don't know what they're going to look like. Okay. So that's my little spiel about the books, but it has nothing to do with the content of the actual episode, because that's not the experience that we're getting. It's not a 1-to-1 adaptation ratio, is it? So we get to really see this from Jamie's vantage point. And when we left off, he had passed out when Claire came in and he saw her. So we're getting to see a little bit about what he did prior to going to the print shop that morning. He left a place, and a woman was kind of preening him and making him presentable for the day. But you don't really get a sense that they have an intimate connection, but they do know each other well. And he's walking through the streets of Edinburgh, and he seems very big as he's walking through these streets, these small streets. And he gets to the print shop, and he spiffs up the sign. He gets his thumb wet, and he's very proud of this sign and of his establishment and what he's accomplished. So we get the sense right away that Jamie has built some sort of life. That even though we don't know exactly what happened between him leaving Hellwater and now, that he has done something, and that he definitely takes pride in it, and he's upstanding with it, right? It's something that's good and purposeful for him. And we see immediately that there's something else going on, because he goes in the shop and he hears some voices and he pulls out his dirk. The man is always prepared, like a Boy Scout. So we find out that it's some men that call him MacDoo, his old prison name, and he's upset that they're there during the daytime. So Jamie must have some other types of business dealings that are not so above board as a printer's business. And we also get to meet the famed Geordie, that he asked Claire if it was Geordie. He's a very salty young guy. He doesn't like the two other men that are there, and they're insulting him because he has this goiter on his neck, this growth, generally non-cancerous, normally benign. And it made me wonder immediately if Claire's going to take time to do surgery on this for him. It could be her first one back in the 18th century. Who knows? Probably not, but I like the idea of it. And we get to see Jamie working with the press after he sends the two men away with some seditious pamphlets that they need to deliver and be very careful for. So he's not just a straight-up printer. He's using the word as a sword. And he sends Geordie on his way to get some ash for the printer. And then we get to see him doing some work, and he's actually working the press. And it's beautiful to watch. There's a rhythm to it, and there's a lot of tradition in it, it feels like. And the other thing I was really struck by immediately is there are subtle changes to his physical countenance, how he holds his chin, how he holds his body, how he moves. And that gives us some aspect of his aging process. He pulls out spectacles and puts them on to read the sheet that he just printed. And it's the way he's using these mannerisms that tell us that he's indeed older. He's in his 40s. He's not even the same man who left Hellwater. And that to me is really impressive, even though he doesn't really look that much older. And at this point is when Claire comes in and he faints. So now we're starting fresh from where the last episode let off. It's really awkward. The look on his face is hilarious and he's so confused. And he realizes that he's wet and he thought he peed himself, but he didn't. It was the ale pot that got spilled. So they're acting very unknown to each other. Sort of like when they first met and they had that awkwardness and trying to figure each other out, even though they had some sense of camaraderie and knowing at the same time. So he has to take off his brakes because they're wet. And he wants Claire to turn around and she doesn't. She's like, we're married. Well, at least I think we are. And he says, yes, they are. And she doesn't turn around. She just stands there steadfast. She's whatever. And he takes off his pants and then they have that intimate moment where they get closer and closer together. Now, mind you, he's a man who's just taken his pants off and they didn't have underwear in those days. So his shirt is long, but there's nothing to encumber him, let's say. And that moment when they're so close and he asks if he can kiss her and she says he can, but they're looking at each other and it's intense and they kiss and then he's talking to her just so close, face to face. That is intimacy right there. I know there's a lot of ground to cover and there's a lot of gaps to fill and a lot of unknowns. It reminds me of if you haven't seen your best friend in person for 10 years and you walk in the room and you can't stop talking and you need to touch them and it's like they never left or you never left. And Jamie and Claire almost look like, oh my gosh, I have somebody to talk to and you're here and I can't believe it. That's the sense that I got from it and it's very sweet. And it's really exciting and their emotions are just brimming at the surface. It's just sitting there, but they're containing it. And I like that sense of containment and that reserve. And I like that they have this restraint because they probably just want to tackle each other, right? And they don't. It's this very slow burn and this slow dance. And I happen to like it. I've seen other things people have said that they thought it was really slow and they didn't like it. And they thought it was really safe and not, sexy time at all. Well, I don't agree with that. I like how it was done because I can imagine myself in the same situation after 20 years, even if it didn't feel like it'd been that long once I saw the other person, I would be very aware of how much time had passed. They are like skipping their breaths. It's halting when he tries to talk to her. And when he explains to her how she came to him when he needed her, when he was ill, fevered, thought he would die, when he would dream, but she would never touch him like she was touching him now. It's fabulous. I really like it. And we're getting a lot of well-known text here. So those of you who haven't read the books, this episode was built on an amazing amount of book text. So I really love it and found it amazing. And their eyes are tearing up, both of them. And I found that to be so heart-rendering from my part. I mean, Sam and Katrina are both fantastic actors. And they reach out and touch us and make us feel what they're feeling. And she says, "Do not be afraid." And he says, "There's the two of us now." So we're going to see throughout this episode a lot of parallels to the wedding night. And if you don't remember what the wedding night episode was like, go back and watch it, and then watch this again. But they have a maturity to them now. They don't have that sense of newness and awe. And they've lived a whole lot of life, grieving and half a person and like walking, talking ghosts in their own lives. So as they're kissing, again, Geordie comes in, and this is one of the best moments. And he yells, "I quit. I'm free church. Working for a papist is one thing, but working for an immoral papist is another. Do as you like with your own soul, man. But when it comes to orgies in the shop, it's come too far. God's tooth, it's not even noon." And he storms out. Oh, I need a shirt that says "God's tooth, it's not even noon." That'd be fabulous. We could spot Outlander fans everywhere just from that t-shirt. I mean, I don't know if they were having orgies, but they were certainly intimately kissing, and Jamie has no pants on. So he invites Claire to come into the back room with him as he gets dressed. And he puts his pants on and a little embarrassed, and he tells her it's fine to see her again. So there's a sense of formality because there needs to be, but they have this immediate vulnerability and connection to each other, and they just want to tell each other. And it's like they've had all these things to say, and they haven't been able to say it. So it's paced. And again, some people thought it was really slow. I thought it unfolded how it probably would in real time. He asks about the child. It dawns on him. What about the child? And Claire says he has a daughter, and her name... Oh, she doesn't tell him her name yet. She hands him a stack of photos in age grouping. And I really adore how it was explained. That's like a painting, but capturing an image with light. And he looks at the photo, and then he gets very nervous, and his insecurity shows, and he has to pull out his spectacles. And he's worried that Claire will think it makes him look old. She only thinks he looks dignified and dashing, and she tells him that she dyed her hair because there was some gray in it. So they're matching each other, one for one. And it feels genuine. And he tells her that time doesn't matter and she'll always be beautiful to him. That's the right answer, Jamie Fraser. He looks at the top photo and then goes to sit down. He doesn't cry and he's not overly demonstrative, but he's having to maintain himself. Remember, he just fainted and got over a terrible shock. This is happening pretty quickly. He asks what her name is, and she says her name is Brianna. What an awful name for a wee lass, he says. And Claire reminds Jamie that she promised to name the baby after his father, Brian. And then he softens toward the name. He wants to know about her as a small child and what her first word was and what she looks like. And she has red hair, just like Faith. And I'm glad they brought that up. It was important to put that out there. They have a daughter that's not alive, but she's not forgotten either. It's meaningful. The next picture is at Claire's graduation when Brianna is about 7. And she tells him she graduated medical school and she's a surgeon. And Jamie takes it in stride. He just takes it like, of course you did. That's fantastic. You had the skills before, you've always been, but now you have the title to go with it. I think that's one of the differences between Frank and Jamie, is that Jamie's not constrained completely by the time that he lives in. He sees Claire for who she is. He's not afraid of who she is. He's not afraid of where she came from. And he's very comfortable with her skills. It doesn't make him less of a man because she has this incredible skill set. I mean, Jamie needs to be healed a lot, so he's probably glad she's back for that. He goes through the pictures and he completely thinks it's unsuitable and it's scandalous that Brianna's in a bathing suit, or a bikini as Claire calls it. And then he all of a sudden gets up and she's thinking he's upset by the bathing suit, but he says he has something to tell her. And he just spits it out. I have a son. The first viewing, I was really conflicted and thought it felt odd. But the second viewing, again, it felt like he finally had the one person he could say anything to, he could tell anything to in front of him, and he just had to get it out. He hasn't even told his sister. So Claire is here, and he just has to get it out. He has to tell her. And she handles it really, really well. She knows he had a life while she was gone. I mean, heck, he could have 10 kids, for all she knew. He could have had a wife and she died, or all sorts of things could have happened in his world. So it reminded me almost of like, take a picture of your kid to work day sort of thing, and you had to share. But regardless of William being a bastard and having somebody else's name, he's still Jamie's. And that was really well done there. It was just really shocking, the first watch through. And then he asked Claire, first, Claire wants to know if he loved Willie's mother, and he didn't, and he explained the circumstances very briefly and has a lot of guilt over her death, more because he didn't love her. And then he wants to know why she came back, and if she left Frank to come back, and if Frank took her and loved her. And Claire handled this very well, very discreetly. She got the point across without being mean. And again, that difference between Frank and Jamie is that Frank was never, was never threatened by Frank. He was never threatened by his existence. He sent Claire back to him because he knew this man loved her. And he wanted something good for Claire. If he couldn't give it to her, he wanted her to have it. That's how much he loved her. And Claire always wore both wedding rings around Jamie. And Jamie didn't get offended by that. He would talk about Frank. And so I do wonder if, in fact, if Frank would have been open to talking to Claire about Jamie and letting her express her feelings and her grief, if he would have walked that out like Jamie did, knowing she had to be grieving, I think maybe Claire and Frank could have actually built a positive new relationship. It wouldn't have been the same, and she may not have loved him the way she did before, but there'd have been genuine tenderness and love in a way that wasn't. Because she wasn't allowed. She had to cut that part of herself off, and she did. But when she cut that part of herself off, she cut everything off from Frank too. It was on or off. There was no in between. There was no sectioning Jamie out and leaving Frank. They came together, and Jamie understands that it's a package, that Frank is part of Claire's life and part of her existence, and he's a father to Jamie's daughter. And it doesn't threaten him. That's huge. That was such a big epiphany after 20-some years of going, oh my gosh, maybe that's it. What do you think? Does that resonate with you? Does that make any sort of sense? But Claire was very kind about how she spoke about Frank, and she was very truthful. And then we hear the bells ringing in the streets, and Jamie realizes he's late for an appointment. I mean, she did drop in on his normal life, so he has business. He can't just take time off, right? So he gets his shoes on, and he asks her if she will come with him. Of course, wild horses couldn't keep me away, right? So while they're walking and they're going through the marketplace in the street, she's explaining to him what happened historically to Bonnie Prince Charles. And then they see somebody wonderful. They see grown-up Fergus. He's maybe 30 at this point. And they hug, and it's a miracle, and he's excited and wants to know where she came from, and she sees his hand. It's everything. But there's something else going on, and he has to talk to Jamie. So his associate, Mr. Willoughby, has gotten in trouble for drinking, but there's something else. And he pulls Jamie aside and asks what they're going to do about, and Jamie says he has to contact Ned Gowan for legal advice. So something big is going on. What do you think that something big is? But Jamie kind of plays it off and says, well, Claire's back, so I'm not so worried about it. What are your thoughts? Now, book readers, I don't want to hear from you. I would like to hear from viewers. And what do you think is Jamie's big secret? Obviously, there is one, based on what Fergus said to him. So they're going to the World's End, which is a famous tavern. It's still in existence in Edinburgh. And Mr. Willoughby, who's actually a man from China, is getting his ass handed to him by a barmaid. And she's angry because he wanted to lick her elbow and not pay her full price for it. That's some weird sexual fetish. I'm just saying. But she wanted to charge him a penny a minute. Now that's another t-shirt. It should be, what would you do for a penny a minute? I think I really need to make some of those. It's too funny. So Jamie pays her, and he has to go deal with some business. So he leaves Willoughby and Claire sitting at a table and wants them to sit there and not cause any problems. So far, Claire has listened to him, but they haven't really done anything yet. She's only been there a couple of hours. So we learned that his name is not Willoughby. His name is Yi Tian Zhou. And it's a beautiful name in Chinese translation, but it means something very rude in Gaelic or close to it. So Jamie came up with Willoughby. And they're having this great conversation, and she's learning how he got there and what Jamie did for him and what their relationship is. And Jamie's doing business in the back, and it's Sir Percival. He's a government official, and he's taken protection money from Jamie. He's really smarmy, and he's trying to demand more, saying that Jamie needs further protection because he's selling his goods. which we're still not sure what it is yet. I mean, I'm thinking smuggling at this point, but we don't know for sure. He has not said. So, Jamie and Claire leave the tavern, and they leave Willoughby there. So hopefully he didn't harass anybody else after that. Jamie takes her back to the same dwelling he was at in the morning. And now it has to be late afternoon. And they walk in, and it's apparently a brothel. There's like boobies everywhere and half-naked people. And Madame Jean, who we saw in the beginning, is very upset that Jamie brought a woman, but he brings his wife. And she thinks it's really offensive that he would do such a thing. And she chastises him, and he asks for his room. And Claire looks dubious at best at this, as I think most of us would. I have nothing against sex workers if they're choosing it openly and not being coerced in some fashion or have fallen into it under coercive circumstances. But I also don't know if I want to spend my first night back with my honey, or hopefully my honey, again, in a brothel. It's pretty funny. So they go up to his room, and Claire is not sure what to think. And she wants to know why he has a room there. Is it because he's a good customer? And he's like, no, she's my customer. And he kind of explains it. And there's sex sounds going on all around them, which is amazing and funny. But I guess if you got down to the that you wouldn't care if you made any noise either at this point. And I really feel like the director has done an excellent job in this episode. It's really clean and inviting to watch. And he wants to know why she came back. Man, how did that sound to Claire? She gave up everything. He knows how difficult that travel is through the stones, how terrified she was of it. She left their daughter 200 years in the future, and he asked her this question. Wow. And did she come back to be his wife, or just to give him word of his daughter? Really? Jamie? A little thick. And she said, well, she came back now because she thought he was dead before. And explains how Roger, or a young historian rather, found him. And she decided to take a chance when she thought A. Malcolm could be him. She took a chance. That's like the most big understatement of the century. Really? Taking a chance is driving a few hours to see somebody without telling them you're coming first. Taking a chance is getting on a plane and flying to another country when you can always come home. This is more than taking a chance. She risked her life and gave up everything to come. And he asked her why. But why? And she's getting really frustrated here, and she's asked if he's trying to tell her something. Does he have other ties that she needs to know about? And he cuts her off and he says, I have burned for you for so long. Do you not know? But I am no longer the man you once knew. And he goes on to say they knew each other less right then than they did when they were first wed. And she says, do you want me to go? Well, he doesn't want her to go, and he says, but I must know, do you want me? Whoever you are, James Fraser, yes, I do want you. He was asking her if she could take him for who he was now and not just for the man he was when she left. A lot of years, a lot of experiences, a lot of life. And she says that, what does he know? She could be a horrible person. But he doesn't really care. He doesn't think so. there's a knock on the door and they're kissing, and I wanted to be like, land shark. But it's dinner, and Pauline comes in, and Claire looks embarrassed. Again, this is new. It's awkward. He feels the same. He looks close to the same. She can talk to him, and that intimacy and that vulnerability and that openness is just coming right back. And it's still new, regardless. And they have wine and dinner and conversation. And again, this is very reminiscent of the wedding night episode. But she doesn't drink as much this time. She's not hammered. And they fill in the blanks. And they talk about their history and their time apart. And as this meal winds down, they're both thinking about, And he asks, will you come to bed with me, Sassenach? Oh no, sorry, I messed it up. Will you come to bed with me then? And she, of course, says yes. And they begin to undress each other. And I loved it. He would take something off of her, she would take something off of him, and they took their time. I mean, women wear a lot of clothes. She has way more clothes on than him. It takes a lot of effort. You could have quickies because women didn't wear underwear and they wore dresses, but you didn't get naked easily or quickly. You couldn't just get clothes back on and nobody knew what you were doing, right? And they're looking at each other's eyes the whole time. I mean, it's really sensuous. And then they get to that zippered corset and he's like, ooh. My husband yells, alchemy! It's like this magical zipper corset. So I don't know if Claire made that. I don't think so. She probably picked that up at the store because she had to have a corset on over the shift. And I wondered where she got the bum roll. Did she pick it up in Inverness when she got there? Because those things are really difficult to make, I've heard. So she probably did not make it lickety-split with the rest of the outfit. So Claire is standing there naked, and he just looks at her. And then her insecurity crops up and she covers herself and she wants him to say something. And he tells her, Christ, Claire, you're the most beautiful woman I've ever seen. And of course she says, you must be really losing your eyesight. But then she wants to see him and he's down to his shirt. And it comes off and his back, the scars, seem so much worse with age. They're a terrible reminder, but she doesn't even see those. You know, and then it seems like they're going to get busy, and they go over to the bed, and he cracks his forehead on her nose. Okay, they could have played this really straight up, sexy, like TV sex, right? And instead, they show like what happens to the rest of us in the bedroom, right? And then he like squishes her and pulls her hair and they start laughing. It's funny. Sex is funny. And that's one of the reasons we relate to this so much is because we experience these things and these characters have layers and depth and they're not just caricatures. They're not just one-dimensional. We see our everyday life. We see people we know in them. Or we see experiences that we would like to have. I mean, really? Wouldn't you like someone to look at you like Jamie looks at Claire, like he just wants to eat her up and touch her all the time, and she's better than any invention in the entire world, and she looks at him the same way? Man, that is love. That is power. That is intimacy. Because they see each other fully. And it's not just a naked body, it's a naked soul. And they're rekindling that honesty, and it's just coming back online. I love it. And then they get down to business. And it's, again, like the wedding night where it's kind of needful and urgent. And then there's the afterglow. And I'm sitting there thinking that Claire has not had sex in a very, very long time. I mean, even if, let's just say, she took care of herself which it's possible. But if you really like being in communion with another person, if you miss their body, their smell, their touch, how they are with you and you are with them, taking care of basic sexual needs by yourself, it's okay, but it's lacking. It's not just about an orgasm. And she hadn't felt that in almost 20 years. And then I was thinking, welcome back to O-Town, Claire, because she could do it herself, but being with him, and once I got going, he knew her body and remembered it. Yeah, awesome. And he just wants to touch her. He can't help himself. It's wonderful. How are they ever going to not touch each other? There's not enough minutes in the day to make up for the years that they lost. And their desert is over, because Jamie said he hasn't kissed in a very long time. So if he's not kissing on a regular basis, he's not having either on a regular basis, right? So we know that he had one experience with Mary McNabb, one with Geneva Dunsany, which resulted in William. That's 2 in 20 years. And we know by what he said, he's not getting anything now. So, wow, that's a dry spell. And then she says, it's like riding a bicycle, I suppose. What is a bicycle? I like how she throws in her 20th century things at him. And just like it was before, they have this excellent bed talk. They're comfortable. They're at ease with each other. And of course, they're hearing more sounds of the working girls. And she said she never thought at all that she would be with him in a brothel of all places. I'm not a Saint Sassenach, but I'm not a pimp either. So it's not his brothel, it's Madame Jean's. They just made it work. It's all good. She tries to guess his occupation. And of course, they're doing it in this really sexy manner, I think. It's provocative. And they're laughing and they're smiling. But it's like we haven't seen them smile much at all. They didn't smile at all in season 2, hardly. Very little. And then the first part of season 3, there was very little smiling. So we're finally seeing them emerging. And they're coming back into full view. And he says that he's still a traitor and explains to her that the printing press is a weapon because his actual weapons were taken away. Now he can use words, and they're powerful. It's true, the printing press was one of the most keen inventions of all time because it brought all types of material to the public. Where before, when things had to be handwritten, only very wealthy people or people in learning institutions or high up in religious institutions would have books, would have Bibles or other religious texts. It was too consuming and expensive. And when the printing press came out, all of a sudden the words were free to go to anyone. That is a glorious thing. Knowledge is power. They talk about the seditious materials that he writes and that he's still a traitor and just none of it has stuck yet. And humor fills their conversation. And she told him she didn't come there to make love to him once and leave. And I'm like, damn it, do they have chemistry or what? And she tells him, I came back to be with you. He can't bear the thought of losing her again. So if she's here, she needs to be here. And then he sits up after she says, you won't lose me, not unless you do something immoral, like for a living, she means. And then, is there something you haven't told me? And he reveals he's a smuggler of liquor, mostly whiskey, but lots of other things as well. And that's the arrangement with Madame Jeanne. And I keep thinking, and then they go in for slow, tender, I need you sex. And on my third viewing, during this one, it looked like Jamie had tears on his face. This was the healing one. This was the acknowledgement of how much I've missed you. It was just not raw lust. It's so much more than that. And they were looking at each other. It's beautiful. But then I'm yelling, Claire, get up and use that chamber pot. You need to pee. You shall not get a UTI in 18th century Scotland. No, no, no. I was wagging my finger at her, thinking, man, I hope she did. And then we see the thigh scar on Jamie afterward when they're snuggling, and it was at Culloden. It looked far better than I thought it would. I thought it'd be grisly like his back. And she says she will never leave him again. She has a lot of guilt for leaving. But he assuages that guilt, telling her she was right to go, and that she's given him a daughter who's healthy and alive, and that means Claire and he will never die. They will carry on forever. And he doesn't have that with William. Though he's his biologically, his name is someone else's. His family is somebody else's. This is truly only Claire and Jamie's. He's watching her sleep. He wants to see how different she is, and she wakes and reaches to touch him to make sure that he's real. And he says, maybe I'm a ghost. So this is a theme in this episode, but could that be foreshadowing something else? Remember way back in season 1 when there was a ghost of him standing outside of her room in Inverness when she and Frank were there before she went through the stones? So maybe it will be revealed why he was the ghost later on. I'm hoping so. And then he looks at her in that way we all want to be looked at. He reminds her he used to call her Monique and down, my brown-haired lass. And then they talk about him asking her way back what it was between them, and she didn't know, and he didn't either, and she still doesn't know, but it's still there. Yeah, that thing is still there between them when they touch, when they lie together. And he says, I never thought I'd laugh in a woman's bed again, or go to a woman's bed save as a brute blind with need. And she asks if that's what he would do when he was in need. And then he gets very disconcerted and sits up, and she knows he's going to tell him something. She knows he's going to say something really serious. And she cuts him off and says, I don't have to rush it. It's okay. And she has only one question for him. Did you ever fall in love with anyone else after I left? And he gives her a pretty emphatic no, that she's the only one he's ever loved. And that's all Claire needed. She knows they both had a life, and that she didn't expect him to be celibate, and she didn't expect him to be by himself, and he could have had a family. But knowing he didn't love anyone else will help her withstand what is to come. And then they're going on to round 3 of sex. That's pretty good for Jamie. He is in mid-40s. A lot of pent-up sexual frustration, methinks. And there's a knock on the door as he's going in. And it's for breakfast. And he sends her away. And Claire says, "Don't you want to eat?" And he says, "Aye," as he's sliding down toward the downtown of Clare. He had a different type of breakfast in mind, after all. He has work to do, and he's getting dressed, and he reminds her that she's Mrs. Malcolm in Edinburgh, not Fraser, and he wants her to stay at the brothel. And she doesn't think she's going to go anywhere because her legs feel like jello. After not riding a horse for a long time. There's muscles you don't know you have. You forget that they're useful for Poor dear, her lady parts must be very sore at this point. Oh, but Claire looks happy. And she goes back to sleep for a while. And when she does get up, mind you, she hasn't had breakfast. There's like virtually nothing left from dinner. There's a knock on the door and she thinks it's Jamie, but it's young Ian looking for Mr. Malcolm. And she is asked, "Are you Mr. Malcolm's woman?" And she says, "I guess so." And he gives his name, and she realizes he's Ian and Jenny's son. And he thinks she's a prostitute until she says she knows his parents, and she's his Aunt Claire. And he wants to know if she's from the fairies. Does she live in a dun? Well, she did go back with the fairies, but he doesn't really need to know that, does he? She said she thought everyone was dead after Culloden and she went to the colonies, but now she's back. And he makes a face, and that tells us again, like Fergus's face, there's a big secret. And he says, "Very nice to meet you, Uncle Jamie's wife." And he leaves. So Claire in her shift and wrapped in a blanket heads downstairs for food because remember, Jamie sent the trays away. And she's gingerly walking down the stairs and the working girls are eating breakfast because they've been up all night. This is their meal and they're going to bed soon, I presume. And they think she's a new girl working for Madame Jean. And they think she's a little bit old to come in because usually 5 and 20 is all Madame Jean will hire at the top end. They probably think Claire's like 30 years old or something. And one of them reaches out and says she's got nice skin and nice bubbies, and she reaches and grabs her boob. It's Dorcas and Peggy and Molly. And they look her over and think she's had a rough night. Her neck is all red and she's walking like her bottom's sore. And they give her all this advice about not getting pregnant and soaking her lady parts in an herbal bath and all of these things. Pretty good advice all in all. And the birth control advice is a sponge that's dipped in vinegar or wine if needed. You could also use lemon juice. That's some good advice not to get pregnant. And one of them says she has to stick that up your nether mouth. You'll no get a squealer. I've never heard of a vagina being called a nether mouth before. And the fact that she would call a baby a squealer is just killing me. I love that scene so much. And Claire just sitting eating with the girls and happily doing so. And then a customer comes in. It's an unusual time. And they're like, "Oh, the new girl gets them because none of us want them." And I think it was Dorcas who said, "Oh, put a finger up his bum. That'll get him off faster than anything." Straight talk. And then Madame Jean comes in and she is absolutely mortified that Claire is eating with her girls. And she asks Claire if they didn't get breakfast. And she says, "No, but it's okay." And she's shoving food in her mouth still. All that sex must have made her just ravaged with hunger because she was eating. A lot. And Madame Jean offers to send the food up to her room, what's left on her plate. And Claire, as she's getting up, is putting food in her mouth, saying, "No, it's okay, I'm done," and drinking the rest of her tea. And she happily goes upstairs. And as she re-enters the room, there's a man searching. And he's looking for ledgers. And Claire says, she's, the wife, right? It's her husband's room. And it closes with Claire telling him to leave, and he grabs her, and that's the end. Dark. So I know I took the route this episode of going through pace by pace with the episode, and it really is because there was so much detail in about this 24-hour period that I didn't want to miss anything. And what storylines do you see coming out of this episode? We have Mr. Willoughby. We need to know what's going on with Fergus. We need to know about Jamie's smuggling job, right? What about Sir Percival, that smarmy, underhanded lawman? Okay, what about the man in the room who's now going to assault Claire? She's been back for 24 hours. And she's going to get, roughed up by this guy. And what about the big secret that Jamie has? Why is young Ian working for his uncle? He's 16. Why isn't he at Lallybroch? What is Jamie talking to Ned Gowan about? Will he ever see William again? He doesn't expect to. So there's all these things going on in the story. What else do you see? Did you think the episode was at a correct pace, or was it too slow? I like that after speeding through so much time in previous episodes that they really went into slow motion on this one. I appreciated it greatly. And I appreciate you listening. And the ways that you can support the podcast are going into iTunes, Google Play, or Stitcher and leaving reviews for me, sharing the podcast, retweeting or sharing the posts from Facebook or from the website, adramofoutlander.com, and going on to the Facebook page and group, A Dram of Outlander, on Twitter, on Instagram, Dram of Outlander, and following, engaging. Come on over on Wednesday nights. We have a weekly evening chat at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern, where we talk about the previous week's episode, podcast happenings, and new people are joining in every week. And we use the hashtag ADOO for A Dram of Outlander. I know. How do you get your comments heard? Well, you can call in to the voice line at 719-425-9444. That's one way. You can email contact@adramofoutlander.com, or you can post messages on the website or on social media. I want to hear from you. I want your thoughts and your insights, your questions. I want to know what you want me to do more of, what I could do less of. What do you like about the podcast? Oh, and I need your help as a listener. If there are quotes that you really like from the podcast, I need you guys to tell me what time it starts and ends in the podcast and what the basic quote is, what it was about, because I can pull those out and share those little snippets on social media. And I think it would help more people come to the podcast and listen, because your feedback helps me know what listeners like. So thank you for all your support. And the final way you can support the podcast is financially. I have a patreon.com page /adramofoutlander, and you can do a monthly offering of $1 or more, or you can do a one-time offering and just contact me by phone or email if you'd like to do that, and we can arrange it. That just helps support everything I do for the podcast, equipment and time and website and all of those things. And I hope you enjoyed the podcast, and I cannot wait to hear back from you. I loved it, and I'm thrilled beyond belief how this season is shaping up. Until next time, Slàinte mhath.